Welcome back to The Explainer. Okay, today we are unpacking an absolutely fascinating presentation by Dr. Becker. And honestly, it is going to completely reframe how you think about the biochemical impact of your daily bread. We're diving deep into the surprising science of gut health, cellular defense, and this ancient fermentation practice that modern food manufacturing has, well, almost entirely engineered right out of existence. So let's jump right in.
It's a pretty striking question, isn't it? I mean, every single morning, roughly 130 million Americans sit down and eat bread for breakfast. You know the drill: toast, a bagel, a sandwich, usually something sliced and wrapped in plastic. It looks perfectly normal. But what Dr. Becker's research compilation reveals is an invisible danger. The bread sitting on your counter right now, it might be actively dismantling the very biochemical system your body uses to protect itself from colorectal cancer, which, by the way, is the second deadliest cancer in the U.S. We aren't just talking about a food that lacks nutrients here. We're talking about a food that is systematically starving your cellular defenses.
To really understand how this happens, we have to meet the main protagonist of our explainer today. Enter butyrate. First things first, we need to completely rethink the colon. It is definitely not just a passive tube or some waste disposal chute. No, it is a highly active, microbially packed fermentation vessel. To put that into perspective, a single gram of healthy colonic mucosa contains around 100 billion bacteria. Mind-blowing, right? And these microbes have a crucial job. They ferment dietary fiber, specifically resistant starch, into short-chain fatty acids. And butyrate? It's the ultimate upstream compound. It is literally the absolute key to keeping your colon's defense mechanisms fully functional. Now, the absolute magic of butyrate is that this exact same molecule creates two entirely different outcomes, completely depending on the cell it enters. So inside a healthy colon cell, a colonocyte, butyrate acts like premium fuel. It enters the normal metabolic pathways, generates ATP, and basically keeps the cell energized and replicating perfectly. But colorectal cancer cells, they're metabolically inflexible. They rely almost entirely on glucose for energy, which is a phenomenon known as the Warburg effect. So when butyrate shows up at a cancer cell, the cell literally cannot burn it. It just doesn't know what to do with it. And because the cancer cell can't use that butyrate for energy, the molecule just starts accumulating in the cell's nucleus. This triggers a very well-documented mechanism, which has been researched extensively at the University of Texas, called HDAC inhibition. Think of histone deacetylases, or HDACs, as a heavy padlock that keeps your body's natural cancer-fighting systems turned off. Well, butyrate is the key. It picks the lock, it reactivates your tumor suppressor genes, and it literally commands the cancer cell to undergo programmed self-destruction. And the best part? Meanwhile, all your neighboring healthy cells remain perfectly fueled and totally safe. It is just an incredibly precise natural defense system.
But wait, it goes beyond just directly targeting cancer cells. Butyrate actually has a secondary, super vital immune mechanism. It stimulates the production of regulatory T cells, or Tregs, right there in your colon. You can kind of think of Tregs as your immune system's peacekeepers. Their whole job is to suppress inappropriate inflammation. So if you have low butyrate production, you're going to have low Treg induction, and that leads directly to chronic, low-grade colonic inflammation. This is that slow erosion that takes decades to become a polyp and eventually cancer. It's really the silent upstream problem we should be focusing on.
So, the absolutely crucial point here is this. How much butyrate are you actually getting from your morning toast? Well, according to the data Dr. Becker presents, even if you're eating that expensive commercial multigrain bread from the store, the answer is essentially zero. Literally zero butyrate. Why? Because the single most important variable for butyrate production isn't just eating fiber. It's whether or not that fiber has been pre-fermented. Commercial bread uses fast-acting yeast and completely skips the traditional multi-day fermentation process, so it arrives in your colon as processed starch with zero fermentation history, completely depriving your good bacteria of the raw materials they actually need.
And you know, the absence of fermentation, that's really only half the story. It's what is added to commercial bread that really compounds the problem. Just take a look at potassium bromate, right? It's a flour improver classified as a possible human carcinogen. It's literally banned across the EU, the UK, and Canada, yet we still use it here in the US. Or what about azodicarbonamide, which actually decomposes into carcinogenic compounds during baking? Even calcium propionate, which is what keeps that bread mold-free for like 60 days on the shelf, selectively depresses the exact butyrate-producing bacteria your colon desperately needs. Add in glyphosate residues from the supply chain that actively inhibit the metabolic function of your gut bugs, and well, these additives are essentially engineering the life right out of our bread.
Now you might be sitting there wondering, Okay, if this science is so well documented, why in the world hasn't my gastroenterologist mentioned it to me? Well, it really comes down to a systemic gap. The modern healthcare system is entirely built on these 12-minute appointments designed for procedural triage, right? They aren't built for an 8-minute deep dive into the complex biochemistry of resistant starch. There is simply no insurance billing code for butyrate. And there's definitely no pharmaceutical patent on fermented bread.
To really ground all this dense biology in reality, the source material shares this incredibly compelling case study of Alamitu. In 2014, she was living in Ethiopia, eating traditional fermented flatbread every day, and she had a perfectly clean colonoscopy. Fast forward to 2019, she moves to Minneapolis and incrementally switches her diet entirely over to commercial whole wheat bread. By 2022, a routine colonoscopy actually revealed 2 precancerous polyps. But after discovering the science of butyrate, Alamitu went right back to her traditional 3-day fermented bread. And just 14 months later, her follow-up colonoscopy showed absolutely 0 new polyp formation. This timeline perfectly mirrors the documented microbiome response to sustained dietary change. It's pretty amazing.
So the food Alamitu returned to is made from Arachagrosis teff. This is a 5,000-year-old solution indigenous to the Ethiopian highlands. Get this, it is the world's smallest grain, it's naturally gluten-free, and it boasts an absolutely exceptional nutritional profile. We're talking the highest calcium content of any cereal grain, plus massive amounts of iron. But here is the real secret. When you ferment teff, the bacteria break down phytates. Those are the compounds that normally bind to minerals and stop you from absorbing them. So fermentation makes all that calcium and iron highly bioavailable, which, as you know, is incredibly important as we age.
And the impact of this process on resistant starch? It is absolutely staggering. Standard commercial whole wheat bread yields roughly 1 to 2% resistant starch. But a 3-day fermented Teff Injera? It yields 20 to 30% by dry weight. That is a literal order of magnitude difference in the raw material arriving in your colon, ready to be converted into cancer-fighting butyrate.
So how do we actually act on this? Well, Dr. Becker outlines a super straightforward 3-step fermentation reset protocol that anyone can do at home. First, source some single-ingredient whole grain tough flour. Second, you mix it with water at a 1:5 ratio, cover it loosely, and just let the wild yeast naturally ferment it at room temperature for about 72 to 96 hours. Third, you cook a thin layer on a flat pan until you see those characteristic porous bubbles forming. That's your visual proof of active fermentation gases escaping. Eating 1 to 2 rounds of this daily for 30 days provides your colon with the substrate it's just been starving for. And hey, if you can't do this immediately, intermediate alternatives include genuine 24-hour sourdough, and I mean real sourdough, not the commercial vinegar-flavored stuff, or eating starchy foods that have been cooked and then cooled, which is a fascinating process called retrogradation.
There is immense historical weight backing up this data too. The Ethiopian Orthodox tradition has kept Injera at the absolute center of its communal food culture for millennia. Epidemiologically speaking, despite being a lower resource nation, Ethiopia has some of the lowest documented rates of colorectal cancer in all of Africa. As Dr. Becker brilliantly points out, cultures simply do not preserve painstaking, multi-day fermentation practices across generations unless that process is delivering something biologically essential that unfermented food just cannot provide.
Which brings us right to our final takeaway. I challenge you to go to your pantry right now and actually read the ingredient label on your bread. Are you feeding your colon the resistant starch it needs to produce butyrate? Or are you feeding it potassium bromate, azodicarbonamide, and calcium propionate? It might just be time to rethink your gut health strategy and seriously reconsider what exactly makes up your daily bread. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep investigating, and we'll see you next time.